November episode, the couple behind Seed Restaurant told how they went from being classmates at Stanford University to soulmates in the music business. In part 2, they talk about their journey from Chicago to founding a ministry in Palama Settlement.
When I went to graduate school, I had it in mind to study nationalisms, how groups of people create a national identity. It was sort of current in world politics at the time, because the Soviet Union was falling apart, the former Yugoslavia had fallen apart, and I just thought that was a terribly interesting topic. I got into it my first year at the University of Chicago and just found it terribly boring. So I asked myself, what is the important topic? What sort of things are going to shape the world in the next 50 years? And what I landed on was, well, the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction.
When Jordan was in graduate school, I ended up getting involved in professional theater in Chicago. So I got my SAG and AFTRA and my equity card. I did musical theater. That was my first way into it. And then it led to, bit parts in TV shows and then print modeling and industrials. And Asians look really good in lab coats. So wherever you are, you need an Asian in a lab coat. So I am a singer. We did have a band and we played around in Chicago and Jordan wrote all the original music. He's not a trained musician, but he's just really smart. He can do anything he wants to do, he does. He learned to play the piano and the guitar and the bass and, harmonica. He can just do all that.
Early on in our relationship, I realized that if I wanted to hang out with this girl, I had to pick up some sort of musical skill. So I got hold of a guitar, she taught me my first 3 chords, and lo and behold, it turned out that I had a little bit of aptitude. So I became the guy that backed up Sonya. Right? She was always the star.
My favorite role on a TV show was I had a chance to be on Early Edition, which was shot in Chicago. And I got a really nice guest role, and I got to work with George Takei from Star Trek. Supposed to be his daughter-in-law, the Asian supermarket in the ethnic neighborhood, and there's like a power outage and there's all this racial strife, and then, it all comes together, and, they saved my children. I had this wonderful moment when I got to scream as loud as I possibly could in the middle of the street, and, I'm good at that.
I ended up winning some prestigious postdoctoral fellowships at Harvard. And for a couple of years after I got my PhD, I worked at Harvard as a policy analyst at these think tanks. But again, academia is a very faddish place, and nobody was interested in the proliferation of WMD in those days. And this is like 1998 to 2000. The last paper I wrote when I was at Harvard was a paper examining the question, what to do if Saddam Hussein in Iraq pursued nuclear weaponization. What should we do? And my conclusion was, well, if Saddam Hussein begins to get close to nuclear weaponization, we should pursue a policy of containment and deterrence as opposed to something crazy like an invasion, which would lead to a lot of instability and regional instability. Nobody was interested in that paper in 2000. I was struggling throughout grad school and my postdoc years with just a personal depression, mostly having to do with my purposelessness in life. I felt like I wasn't really accomplishing anything. I wasn't going anywhere. And it occurred to me one week that I might very well be a slave to this career, this academic career for the rest of my life. And I remember saying to myself, do I want to live life chasing success, or do I want to live life truly? And I decided to leave academia.
But really that was a turning point where he left academia and began to pursue seriously that maybe what he was meant to do was to lead folks into kind of a revolution of spiritual and emotional and personal life.
All along, I had been pursuing ministry. All along, I'd been working full-time in ministry. When I left Stanford, I was ministering in East Palo Alto. When Sonya and I moved to Chicago for my grad school, we had gathered some seekers into our loft apartment, and it grew and it grew, and before long we actually planted a church on the south side of Chicago, a church that is still there. That was an accident. We didn't plan to do that. We were just pursuing faith, and it happened. When we got to Cambridge, Massachusetts, we hooked up with some former classmates from Stanford, actually, and got involved in another church plant there. See, I'd been doing it all along, and part of my career redirection was essentially just a surrendering to what had always been my most passionate vocation.
I don't know if we would have said we were really religious. He's kind of he comes from hippie parents, so he's I think just has part of his DNA is to be anti-institutional.
The thing that brought Sonya and I back to Hawaii initially was a job at another church on the island, First Presbyterian Church. It's pastored by a guy named Dan Chun. And I worked with that church for about 4 years. And then they moved from this side of the island to the other side of the island. I felt like most of the heart of my ministry was on this side, so that was the beginning of Blue Water Mission. Blue Water Mission does not meet in a normal church building. We meet in the gymnasium at Palama Settlement. It's a come-as-you-are sort of church. I've been told by the senior kahu on the island that it's the most diverse congregation they've ever seen on Oahu, which really thrills me. I like that. So much flavor coming up from the congregation, people coming from so many different places. This is sort of the entry hub for poor immigrant population in Honolulu. That's why it's such a great place for us to be. Most of our ministries, like Seed Restaurant or our Safe Houses, or our ministry for the keiki, or our music, or our arts ministry, we started because we felt like the Lord had given us people that were gifted in those areas. And if you're gifted in an area by God, that's a calling. You have to pursue it. And that's something that I learned a long time ago.
I'd love for there to be some more partnerships or expansion, this is the sort of work that has to be carried by many groups, not just one organization.
The lessons about humanity that I drew from all of my academic studies, that I concluded from all of my studies, were the same lessons that I concluded from my faith. Namely, if you want to have a good world, you need to create good people. Not good systems, but good, moral, loving, generous individuals. Failing that, you better be a really strategic thinker.